All right, so we're diving into some pretty interesting stuff today. You sent over a bunch of articles about Arab and Muslim American voters and this election. And it's a group that's usually voted for Democrats, but something seems to be changing.
Yeah. The thing that's really interesting to me is this potential shift away from the Democrats. There seems to be this growing sense of disillusionment,
Yep.
especially about Biden's policies in the Middle East. And obviously, the whole conflict in Gaza is a big factor, too.
Right. Yeah, you can definitely feel that tension in these articles. And it's not just, people talking about it. We're seeing actual numbers in the polls that back this up.
Yeah.
Like one poll from the Arab News Research and Studies Unit actually has Trump ahead of Harris with Arab American voters like 43% to 41%.
Yeah, that's a pretty big deal when you think about how much Biden won this community by back in 2020. Makes you wonder what's going on.
Right. It does seem kind of strange at first, doesn't it? Especially when you remember some of the things Trump has said and done in the past. I mean, the Muslim ban, his comments about Islam in America, attacking those Muslim lawmakers like Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib, even those false claims about 9/11 celebrations. It's not exactly the most inclusive picture.
Yeah, for sure. And we have to look at what actually happened during his first term when it comes to the Middle East. Moving the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing Israel's annexation of the Golan Heights, which, is super important strategically. Israel captured it from Syria back in '67 and later said it was their own territory. And then there was all that praise for Netanyahu and even promises to deport those pro-Palestinian protesters. It's kind of a lot to try and make sense of, especially with this new support he seems to have.
Yeah, it's like two totally different realities are bumping into each other.
Yeah.
So what's the Harris campaign doing about all of this? How are they trying to get these voters back?
Well, it looks like they're really focusing on the internet and social media. Lots of targeted Facebook ads, WhatsApp channels, even fact sheets about what Harris has said on Gaza. The main message seems to be that Harris has sympathy for the Palestinians and wants Israel to follow international law. And then they really contrast that with Trump saying he wants to bring back the travel ban and that he's used Palestinian as, an insult.
So it's kind of like a we're not them strategy.
Yeah.
But I wonder if that's enough. Because it seems like the articles are saying this disillusionment goes deeper than just campaign promises.
Oh, yeah, definitely. They feel like the Democratic Party just doesn't care what they think. Like, they're not being listened to. There's this columnist for the Washington Post, Shadi Hamid, who said it really well. He basically said, Arab and Muslim Americans are seeing that the Democrats don't care what their own members want. Because 77% of them think the U.S. shouldn't be sending weapons to Israel.
77%. Wow. That's a huge disconnect between the people in charge and like a majority of her own party.
It really is. And then you have things that the Democrats have done that just make it even worse, like not letting a Palestinian American speak at their national convention.
Oh, right. And what about that incident where a Muslim American Democrat was kicked out of a Harris campaign event in Michigan?
Exactly. Things like that, whether they meant to do it or not, really make people feel like they don't belong and like the Democrats aren't actually serious about reaching out to them.
So while Harris is saying all the right things about the conflict between Israel and Palestine, a lot of Arab and Muslim American voters are thinking actions speak louder than words. They want to see real change, not just promises.
Absolutely. And that's where Trump comes in. He's trying to take advantage of all this disappointment, even though he hasn't exactly been the most welcoming in the past.
Yeah. It's a really strange situation. One of the articles from Fox News, I think, pointed out that the Harris campaign is running different Facebook ads for different groups. Like one ad for Jewish voters in Pennsylvania talks about how she supports Israel defending itself. But then another ad for Arab Americans in Michigan is all about how she's worried about the civilians in Gaza.
Wow. What does all this mean for these communities getting involved in politics in the future? Are we seeing the start of a whole new political alignment?
It really makes you think. Arab and Muslim American voters have always voted Democrat for the most part. So this shift, even if it's just within the margin of error, is a pretty big deal. It means that no party can just assume they have everyone's votes anymore.
For sure. And it's especially true for groups that have always voted for them in the past.
Exactly.
And we're seeing both campaigns really going after Arab and Muslim American voters, especially in places like Michigan, which could make a big difference in who wins. So how they handle this situation is going to affect how parties deal with this group for years to come.
Yeah. And speaking of Michigan, one of the MSNBC articles had a really interesting point. It quoted Josh Rogan from the Washington Post. He said, if Harris does lose Michigan and the election, it won't be because Muslim voters weren't loyal to the Democrats. it'll be because she and the Democratic Party weren't loyal to them.
Wow. He's right, isn't he? There's this chance that no matter how people vote, there's going to be blame and resentment. It shows how important it is to really understand what's going on here.
I agree. We can't forget that Arab and Muslim American voters aren't all the same. They have different opinions and things that are important to them.
Yeah.
And how they vote depends on a lot of different things, from
Yeah.
foreign policy to what's happening here in the U.S. to how included and represented they feel.
Exactly. So to really get to the bottom of this, we need to look closer at those individual things. And that's what we'll do in part 2 of our deep dive. So, it's important to remember that what we're seeing, this shift in how Arab and Muslim Americans are voting, it's not just about disagreeing with certain policies. It's about something much bigger than that.
You're right. It's more about feeling like you belong and having your identity recognized and having your voice heard, feeling like you're a part of the system.
Exactly. It's about feeling like you matter in the political system. And when a whole community feels like they're being ignored or taken for granted, well, it makes sense that they would start to feel alienated and like they don't want to be a part of it anymore.
Right. That feeling really came through in those articles you sent, especially that quote from Shadi Hamid about how the Democratic Party seems to be ignoring what their own members think about giving weapons to Israel.
Yeah, that one really stuck with me too. It speaks to how frustrated Arab and Muslim Americans are feeling. Like the party they've always supported isn't actually representing them.
And it's not just about foreign policy either, right?
Yeah.
Domestic issues are a big part of it too.
Absolutely. All those concerns about civil liberties and economic opportunity and social justice, they all tie into this feeling of identity and belonging that we're talking about.
Like that incident we talked about earlier, where a Muslim American Democrat was kicked out of that Harris campaign event in Michigan.
Yeah.
That really shows how some people feel unwelcome and excluded.
Exactly. And when you combine stuff like that with the feeling that the Democrats aren't really doing anything about the issues they care about, it's no wonder that some people are starting to look for other options.
So it sounds like both parties have some work to do.
Yeah.
If they want to connect with this group of voters who are becoming more and more important.
Yeah, I think so. This election could be a real wake-up call. A sign that they can't just rely on people voting the same way they always have, especially groups that have always supported them. Parties need to go beyond just putting people into categories and start actually engaging with these communities in a way that feels real and genuine.
And that means more than just making promises during the campaign, right?
Definitely. It needs to be about actually doing things, passing policies that really address the things these communities care about.
Right. So it seems like the Harris campaign is trying to appeal to Arab and Muslim American voters by talking about her position on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and emphasizing their shared values. But maybe that's not enough to fix this feeling of disillusionment that's already there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. Just saying the right things and making promises isn't going to cut it anymore. Voters want to see proof that you're serious about their concerns.
And on the other side, you have the Trump campaign, trying to take advantage of all this disillusionment, even though he hasn't really been very welcoming to this community in the past.
It's pretty wild when you think about it. It shows that when people feel neglected, they might be willing to consider options that seem pretty contradictory.
Yeah. So as we get closer and closer to Election Day, it seems like Arab and Muslim American voters are at a crossroads. They're not happy with how things are going, and they're trying to decide which way to go. And their decision could have a huge impact in states like Michigan.
And the results of this election could change things in a lot of ways, not just in politics, but in how these communities relate to the political parties that are trying to get their votes.
That's true. It really shows how important it is to understand all the different things that are going on here. We can't just look at things in a simple way. We need to understand the complex things that make people decide how to vote.
Exactly. And in the end, it's not just about who wins the election. It's about making sure that everyone feels like they belong and that they have a voice in the political system.
I like that. Because a healthy democracy needs everyone to participate, no matter who they are or what they believe.
That's a great point. And it leads us to another really important part of this discussion. What are the potential consequences of all these changes we're seeing?
Okay, so now we're getting to the good stuff. What are those consequences? How might this affect not just who wins this election, but also how these communities get involved in politics in the future? Let's explore that in part 3 of our deep dive. So we've talked about how Arab and Muslim American voters are feeling kind of disillusioned right now.
Yeah.
And how that might lead them to move away from the Democrats, and how both the Democrats and the Republicans are trying to win them over. What are the potential consequences of all this?
Well, one of the most immediate consequences is the impact it could have on this election. Arab and Muslim American voters, especially in those swing states like Michigan we've been talking about, they could really decide who wins. Their votes could actually determine who becomes president.
It's pretty incredible to think about. A group that has always voted Democrat could now have that much power.
It really shows how much things are changing. Parties can't just assume they have certain votes locked in anymore.
And what about the bigger picture? How might this affect how Arab and Muslim American communities interact with the political parties in the long run?
Well, if one party keeps ignoring their needs and the other party, even if it seems like they're just taking advantage of the situation, keeps trying to win them over, it could totally change which party they support.
We're already seeing some signs of that, right?
Yeah.
Some Arab and Muslim American voters are saying they'd consider voting for Trump, even with all the things he's said and done.
Exactly. And if that keeps happening, it could completely change how politics works in this country for years to come. The parties would have to seriously rethink their strategies, like what they say, how they reach out to people, and what policies they support, if they want to connect with this group that's becoming more and more influential.
It's like a wake-up call for everyone involved in politics. Things are changing, and the old ways just don't work anymore.
I think that's a great way to put it. And this shift could lead to some really positive changes. It could empower these communities to demand more representation and inclusion, not just in politics, but in every part of American society.
That would be great to see. To see this political engagement turn into a bigger movement for social and economic justice.
It's definitely possible. It's important to see this as part of bigger changes happening in society, not just something that's happening during an election.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you want our listeners to take away from all of this?
Here's something to think about. This whole situation shows us that political alliances can change, and that we need to understand how complex identity and representation are in a diverse democracy like ours. It reminds us that being involved in politics is a conversation that's always happening between communities and the people who want to represent them. And how that conversation goes can have a huge impact on the future of our country.
That's a powerful thought. This has been a really insightful deep dive. Your expertise has helped us understand all the complexities of this changing political landscape. And to our listener, we hope this is giving you a new perspective on how Arab and Muslim American voters are shaping the future of American politics. Thanks for joining us.